Hey everyone, Chesburger here. Welcome back to my little series where I'm taking the total drama characters and putting them into an apocalypse scenario. Today's theme is all about vampires. If you have not seen the first two, or at least just one of them, you might be a little confused as to what's going on, but I am going to briefly explain what happens here, just so that if this is the first video that you're watching of this series. But I would highly recommend you watch the other two just so you can get a little more in depth, but I'll briefly explain what's going on. Alright, so I have 100 characters here. There's Julia there at the bottom. And how this is going to work is that it's based off of a tier system. So here's the people that would make it through a few days, a couple weeks, a month, 3+ months, and then eventually the people who will ultimately survive the whole thing. There's a couple different ways that people will go in these at this point in the timeline. I would say these could be from dying from natural causes, so dehydration, hunger, stuff like that. Who would get turned into a vampire, and then who would ultimately die from a vampire attack. Now, to get this started, we're going to have a patient zero, which is going to be based off of a random number generator. So let's do that real quick. And the number is 33. Oh, it's Nichelle. That's very interesting. Very interesting. The Hollywood star getting the first person to get turned into a vampire. So, all right. So let's get started with a few days. I do Now, Nichelle doesn't really have any grudges against really anyone except for maybe like Julia, but I don't think she would be able to get Julia because just Julia is Julia. She's just really strong. She would be pretty good in this scenario, but I do think she would go after some other people. I could see Bo. No, I don't think Bowie would get killed immediately. All right, let's get started with a few days. Who would make it out? Now, the shell doesn't really have any grudges against anyone because I forgot to explain how these vampires are. I decided that I was going to combine both like the Nosferatu like vampires from like Central European mythology and then like the ones from I don't know like Vampire Diaries, just like a mishmash of those two. So they have some intelligence where they don't really have to attack, let's say, a survivor or a human, but it is still a thing that they have to do in order to survive. Like one of them could get turned into a vampire or whatever. So that's just how the scenario is gonna work because I kind of want to do my own little spin on it. Because if this was like the Nosferatu vampires, it'd be a completely different scenario. So I just forgot to mention that. All right, now let's actually talk about who's gonna get killed. I think Anne Maria gets killed first. She'll die from a vampire attack. Um, just no, I feel like because he's attractive, he would want to get turned. They would want to turn him into a vampire because they could see that like as very helpful for consuming the human population, I suppose. Millie, no, she'll be okay. Eva, Eva, no, she'll be fine. I would say the same fate goes to Caleb. Unfortunately, I don't really see him making out of that alive. Or I guess, yeah, technically they are. It's considered undead, but you know what I mean. Which I guess also in a way brings Priya into it. So yeah, that's two strong players already gone. Not players, survivors. My bad. Junior, no one want to go after Junior because he's a kid. They feel bad for him if they do that. I do think Sam will eventually get turned. Do I think he'll get turned? No, I think he'll just get straight up killed. Tyler would get killed. Actually, I think both of them would get turned into a vampire. They'll be like making out or something, but then like no, they would just get no, they would get killed. They're dead, unfortunately for those two. The old men, I would say they get killed in a vampire attack. Nothing more, nothing less. I would say Emma would get attacked, but she would be able to manage to escape. But then she'll like turn into a vampire. Like maybe her and Chase are camping out of like a house or something. Chase notices some strange things about her, and then when he realizes, I think he would get killed. I feel like he would get killed though. I don't think Emma, because at the end of season two, these two are um, broken up and whatnot. So if this was like season one, then maybe this scenario would happen. But since this is their recent canonical forms, yeah, he's definitely dead. I'd say the ice dancers they would just get killed. I think maybe Jose would get killed, but the Jacques is cool about it, and then he'll just get turned. Rodney's definitely dead. Actually, no, he's in the country, so he might be okay. Actually, he might survive for a little bit longer. Devin and Carrie, the LARPers would definitely get killed. I'd say they just get straight up killed. Nothing else than that. The vegans, the vampires would get tired of hearing about their nonsense, so they would just kill them. The rockers, yeah, they're definitely dead. No, yeah, they're definitely dead. I don't see that. I think Blanley would get bribed by one of the vampires, and she'll be all for it to get turned into one. I see Ella dying here. I don't see her getting turned at all. I think she just straight up gets killed. The fashion bloggers, yeah, they'll probably get turned actually. I see the stepbrothers try to pick up a fight with the vampires and then they'll just get killed. Ripper, same scenario. Max, same scenario. He'll try to build something and then dies. Dawn, she's. Oh, I feel like with Dawn. That's a tough one to decide. I think she'll get turned. Stacy dying, or I could see her. I think she'll actually. No, yeah, she's dead, just by natural causes. No, not by natural causes. She'll just get killed. Mom and daughter have some hierarchy, so they'll probably because they are rich, so they'll have a good and nice house. They'll probably have some security. The nerds, I think they'll overthink the whole scenario, and then they'll ultimately just die of natural causes. Dakota definitely getting turned. I would say the adversity twins would actually be immune to like the vampire venom, and then they'll just get the vampires will get tired of that and they'll just straight up kill them. It's kind of sad, but these two won't make it long in this kind of scenario. I feel like the Goths would want to turn into vampires day one, so they'll just beg the vampires to get turned. Anyone else? Wayne and Raj, yeah, they're. I think they'll get turned. I think that's it for, and I think that's it for the first few days. Moving on to a couple of weeks, I think Z is definitely getting wrecked here. I think he'll get turned eventually. I would say Topher probably. I would say he gets turned just from pure luck. Like maybe he's on the brink of death, but eventually the vampire venom saves his life. Junior, I think the father and son would actually do okay in this scenario. Scott, Sierra, no, Sierra would protect Cody. Lashana would really kick some butt. I think Cameron probably dies of natural causes because he's a little guy, so I feel like the vampires wouldn't want to pick on him. But he would eventually just have no sign of food or water, and then he'll just die because of like hunger or something. I would say Trent eventually gets turned into a vampire here. I think MK's snarkiness would get her killed, honestly, because I think it would just be really funny. I would say Jeff and Bridget, just like Tyler and Lindsay, they'll be making out, but I think they'll get turned instead of just getting killed because people probably like them more. I mean, people like Lindsay, but um, these two would definitely eventually get turned. I think the same fate would happen to Devin and Carrie. Amy would get turned so that she can go and kill Sammy. Beth is definitely, yeah, she's probably getting turned. I would say Owen. No, I think he'll be okay. Beardo would definitely die at this point. Damien would be too scared, and I think that the vampires would tease him, and then they'll just kill him because he's such a wuss. Katie and Sadie. I'd say Katie gets turned, but then Sadie dies, just because. I don't know. I mean, it could be either way. I'd say yeah. I think she just straight up dies because maybe they both die. I don't know. It could really. I don't know. It's hard to really say how these two would make. I think they'll make it longer though because they're just like they're best friends. They'll have each other's backs, but eventually they will. They won't make it farther. I'm gonna say they both. I'm gonna say Katie gets turned, but then Sadie gets killed. Izzy, I think of Izzy will eventually get turned, and that would be kind of scary because she just doesn't. She's just so unpredictable, and that will really be a bad sign for all the survivors. I would say if Scarlet eventually I just think she would try to make some big invention to get some of the vampires, which would work, but ultimately it will. The failures would catch up, and then she'll just die because of that. DJ, I think they would. It's the same scenario with Damien, but because since he's so much more of a just a kind person in general, I think they would feel bad for killing him, so he'll get turned. I would say Axel probably gets killed eventually. I think she just gets put in a scenario where she just gets killed. Same thing. I'm gonna say Sky gets turned. I just realized I forgot Dave is still here. Yeah, Sky would get turned into a vampire, and then Dave's fucking simp ass would and go for her, and then he would get turned. Because Sky wouldn't just kill him straight up, but I could just put him here, but I don't know. We'll just leave it with that. Bowie, I think, eventually gets turned. I think he gets bribed eventually, and will just be like, heck yeah, I'm all for that. Ronnie, I think he dies from natural causes. He wouldn't want to go outside. Maybe no. He'll definitely get baited by a hot vampire chick, and then he'll just get killed. Gwen, I think, will eventually get turned at this point. I don't really. I think there's a possibility that she could make it longer, but I think eventually she will get turned. Same thing with Duncan. I think Duncan would be all on it because he's sort of that bad boy who wants to have control over people, so and scare everyone. So by being a vampire, he can do that. Sugar would put up a fight with a vampire and get killed. Mike, Mike. I think Zoe eventually gets turned, and then they have like a wholesome like love moment where Zoe turns him into a vampire or whatever. They kiss, bullshit that happens. I would say Brick eventually gets killed here. He does a good job of defending, gets a couple kills, but ultimately he just dies. I would say ultimately Owen goes here. I'm gonna say he dies of natural causes. I feel like he gets lost with from Noah, and then he just can't find him, and then he just dies. Same thing with Millie. I think Millie, just dies of natural causes. I could also see no Scott would probably live longer. Honestly, B, I would say he eventually gets turned, or he could also die of natural causes. I'm gonna say he dies of natural causes. Stephanie would try to put up a fight. She'll get killed, and then like the vampires will feel bad with Ryan, and they want to keep him alive because he's such a cool guy, so they'll turn him. Sean, no, he would survive longer. Lightning would eventually get himself. He'll get perky and and he'll get himself killed. And I'd say that's it for a couple weeks. Moving on up to a month. I think eventually, father and son, there's going to be something wrong here. I think they'll get into a situation where the father will sacrifice himself for the son. I don't think he gets turned. I could see him get turned and then like protect him, but I feel like just because Dwayne is just kind of a punching bag, I feel like he would just get killed right there on the spot. I think Joe would ultimately get turned at some point. I could see her going all the way. Actually, yeah, I think she'll survive a lot longer, to be honest. I think mother and daughter would eventually get turned. I don't see them dying, though. Brody would eventually get turned. I feel like he would actually die a lot sooner, but I don't know. I still have him here. I'm just going to put him there. I think MacArthur and Sanders would eventually get killed from a vampire attack, unfortunately. I would say the same. No, Julia would eventually get turned. Um, Alejandro. Alejandro. His attractiveness, just like with Justin, I feel like his attractiveness would be helpful to the vampires, but he would. He might actually go along with it, honestly, because he's just, that much of a stud or whatever. Um, I think eventually Harold. I think Harold dies of natural causes. He would eventually just get too chicken or whatever. Sierra would sacrifice herself for Cody. Once again, she died. I could see her get turned, but I'm just gonna say she dies because it's Sierra. Lashana, I think eventually gets turned just because of bad luck. And I think the same thing eventually happens to Heather. I think Alejandro comes chasing down, and then because he loves her, they would eventually she would turn her into a vampire, but then they'll fall for each other somewhat out of pure bullshit. I would say eventually probably Joe and Junior would eventually meet up and actually start working together. Because even though Joe's like pretty authoritarian, I don't think she would be mean to Junior because he's only a kid. Especially because he lost his dad, and I think Joe would want to help him out. I think Scott would get screwed over big time. Um, I think he would just no. I wouldn't say he would get screwed over. I think for Scott, I think he dies from a vampire attack eventually. He just goes bye bye. I'd say the same thing with Courtney. I think Alejandro and Heather would team up to go get Courtney, and then she'll just die from that. And I think that would be it for a month. Now we're at the last here, which is 3 plus months. Unfortunately, I think Sean would ultimately sacrifice himself. I think he will get turned eventually. Like, he won't die, but he'll be on the brink of death, and then he'll come back, and then he'll meet up with Jasmine, and then I think even though he loves her and wants her to be a vampire, I think he'll let her go because he's just like that much of a person who wants everyone to do their own thing. So he would protect her, but he would eventually let her go because he doesn't want to. I don't know. I think he would eventually let her go. I think Eva would eventually get herself in a really bad situation, but I don't think she'll get killed. I think she'll get turned because the vampires will know that she's strong and whatnot. Ezekiel, I think, would die from a vampire attack. I see that happening. I feel like Scary Girl would eventually get turned, even though she's crazy. I think they would eventually realize that she can be um, helpful. For scary for Scary Girl, I would say probably yeah. I think she'll eventually get turned, in my opinion. Now down to these last seven, I think Noah would be working with Emma and Kitty. However, they would get attacked. Noah would be able to escape, and then these two would ultimately get turned into vampires. And I think they would actually protect Noah because it's not like I said in the beginning. It's not like the vampires have to kill, but I feel like these two, because Emma just can't bring herself to kill Noah, and same with Kitty, they would like maybe worked on a pact where like eventually Noah gives up some of his blood to these two, and then these two would just protect him and whatnot. I do think that I could see Noah eventually just dying here, but I don't know. I think because the fact he's getting protected, he won't die from that. Joe and Junior will be working together, and they'll be doing just fine. Jasmine will, I think, will be okay because he's just an explorer. And again, Cody's here because Sierra's protecting him. But I feel like eventually, just like with Sean, Sierra will have to let him go because he needs to move on with life, especially with everything that's going on right now. So eventually, Sierra will let him go, but she's always will always be thinking about him because this is Sierra. And there you have it, folks. These are the people who I think would survive a vampire apocalypse based on the scenario I created for Total Drama. Those are Noah, Joe, Junior, Junior, Jasmine, and Cody. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe as it helps out the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.